everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Nate Zinsser to the show. Nate, great to have you on.
Dan, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance and get to know some folks on the other side of the pond.
Yeah, really excited to be speaking with you, especially as you've got an upcoming book about the confident mind. So today is going to be about going through that. But first of all, why don't we get you introducing yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Certainly. I am a U.S. Sports Psych pro. I did my PhD from the University of Virginia. My training is in a sports science or a physical education program. I am not a licensed psychologist. I consider myself and advertise myself as a highly educated coach, and my coaching specialty is indeed the psychology of training, competing, learning to become your best, and then learning to be your best when the time comes. While my training was largely focused upon competitive athletics, I have found over the years that the same lessons apply pretty much across the board in any performance application you can think of, performing arts, medical specialties like surgery, advertising, financial services, any situation where you have to put yourself into the spotlight, deliver from a place of knowledge and competence, and be as effective in that conversation as possible. Most certainly falling into that category is the military application. And I have been privileged to be the lead sports psychology pro at the United States Military Academy at West Point for the last 30 years. West Point is a premier leadership institution. We are proud to match up against cadets from Sandhurst in military competitions every year. I might add that your Sandhurst blokes do a pretty good job. It's game day on for those fellas. It's game day on for us. And in a military skills decathlon that we hold each year at West Point, appropriately named the Sandhurst competition, teams from England tend to outperform the cadet teams. I'm proud to say for y'all and somewhat embarrassed to say for myself. So that's a long way of saying that I am employed full-time at West Point, teaching our cadets who are future military leaders how to be confident when things are going poorly for you, how to be focused when there's tons of distractions competing for your attention, and how to be composed and energized despite mountains of stress.
Well, so many little entry points for me there, Nate. I mean, first thing to say is that I, as you've mentioned quite explicitly there, as a sport and performance psychologist myself, there's so many crossover skills, isn't there, to industry, the workplace, the corporate environment, and obviously as well as the military, as you've done for 30 years. And I actually did a little bit of work for a consultancy who were based at Sandhurst. I know the grounds of Sandhurst quite well, actually, because they created various obstacle courses around the grounds and tested corporate workers out around Sandhurst. So I know that location quite well. Going back to the beginning of your biography there, which is very impressive indeed, I heard that you are a graduate of the University of Virginia. Now, I'm hoping I'm not going to be confusing my college/universities here, but one Dr. Bob Rotella wasn't around while you were there, was he?
Bob Rotella most certainly was around, and Bob Rotella was my thesis advisor, my primary mentor. I was his graduate assistant for 3 years, which means I basically lived in his back pocket.
Wow.
And that was a tremendous experience. And I can never thank Dr. Bob enough for his mentorship and his guidance.
Well, Nate, my background is I was a pro golfer before becoming a qualified sports psychologist. So you know where this one's going before we talk about your book.
Okay. Let's talk golf, pal.
Well, no, I mean, I just, I picked up Golf is Not a Game of Perfect back in 1995 when it was written, and boy, did I need Golf is Not a Game of Perfect, because certainly my game was far from perfect. But I just want to say to you that Dr. Bob Rotella has been, a hero of mine. For me, Nate, he changed the landscape in many respects within sports psychology, obviously within golf, but I think across sports, with his ability to write in a manner that really brought to life sports psychology. And I ended up writing a book called Soccer Tough for the soccer community in the same style, really using anecdotes, using stories, trying to bring it to life. So I have no questions there, Nate. I mean, I probably have a million questions because I've never met Bob and would love to interview him one day. But wow, I mean, to have the opportunity to work under him must have been incredible. I mean, I suppose I do have one question, if I may selfishly ask, what were your main learnings? What do you perhaps still use today that maybe shone through from your time being supervised by him?
That's an easy question to answer. A principle that I use basically every day in one form or another with the various athletes and other performers that I meet with is the concept of two somewhat distinct but necessarily complementary forms of discipline. The discipline to be analytical, judgmental, critical of oneself in the process of preparation, in the process of building up competence and skill,
Yep.
and then the discipline to be merely observational, accepting, and supporting of oneself so as to enable the expression of the competence that you have built up. So Bob Rotella uses the term training mindset, trusting mindset,
Yeah.
training mentality, the way you have to think in order to become good, better at something. And then the trusting mindset, a different form of discipline, a different form of thinking, a different approach to what you are doing that allows you to express, to unconsciously release all the skill, all the intelligence, all the knowledge that you've acquired. I use the phrase workhorse and racehorse to represent the same thing. I remember a wonderful example that Bob shared with me, in some class a million years ago, where he talked about an American track athlete, a discus thrower.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the discus thrower said, yeah, a champion athlete has got to be able to do three things. You got to dream like a hippie. You got to work hard like a Boy Scout, and then you got to free it up and let it all go like a biker, like a Hell's Angel biker. So that Boy Scout mentality to be diligent to train, and then that sort of biker, here I am, let's go. I've got control of this. Those are all ways of thinking about those same two complementary but very necessary forms of discipline.
I always remember a couple of really important processes that I put in place to try to optimize my golf as a consequence of reading his book. And that was, as you're mentioning there, trust and let go. Trust and let go. I think it was one of the titles of one of his chapters. From a golfing perspective, conservative strategy, cocky swing.
Cocky execution, absolutely.
Is
I was sharing that with a member of our hockey team at West Point just yesterday.
brilliant. That is across every sport. I just find that to be so interesting, and actually, what you find, and I'm pointing probably towards the world of soccer, which is obviously the biggest sport over here, Nate. How people tend to conflate strategy and mindset. Actually,
Yes.
and actually, we've got to try to, they are linked, of course they are, but if we can separate them and understand that actually we can, if we're talking about a team sport, we can set a team sport up in a conservative manner, defensively even. But if the defensive side are playing in a confident, going to be a neat segue onto your book here, in a confident manner, then that's still quite a strong mentality or mindset to have, irrespective of playing conservatively.
Very, very, very true. I've used that same approach. Conservative strategy, cocky swing, or cocky execution. Whatever you are doing, even if it's conservative in terms of, in a tactical sense, execute it with complete conviction. Execute it with complete conviction. We won't know how well it'll work unless you allow it to be executed completely. You can't have a conservative strategy and then a conservative manner of executing it if you want to see how well that conservative strategy actually works.
Well, talking about conviction.
Yes, let's.
And talking about cockiness, let's move on to your book, which is about to be released, The Confident Mind, a battle-tested guide to unshakable performance. I love the metaphor and battle, having been the performance psych at West Point for the last 30 years. Now, you open this book in the preface. You talk about an NFL player who essentially, during an interview, says, yeah, I'm one of the best players in the league. This was back in 2011. I'm one of the best players in the league. I'm as good as, I think it was Eli Manning, wasn't it? I'm as good as Tom Brady. I'm the best player in the league. You just got to be confident, haven't you, to be able to compete out there with the best of the best.
Yes, that statement took a lot of people by surprise and attracted considerable controversy. But the fact of the matter is that Eli Manning believes he's as good as any quarterback in the National Football League because he came to realize that he has to believe that. A performer really has no choice but to be totally confident in him or herself if you really want to perform at your top level. Because confidence is what makes your best performance possible. It's no guarantee, certainly, but it makes possible the expression of everything that you have in your personal and professional set of skills.
Well, you start the book, you introduce the book by posing a question. What is confidence, and what is not confidence? So I'd love to start there, talk a little bit about what confidence is and what confidence isn't. And I'm guessing there's quite a few misconceptions around confidence as well, Nate. So beginning at the beginning, why don't you talk us through this introduction and talk to us a little bit about what confidence is and what confidence isn't?
Certainly. Let me share the definition that I use. It's slightly different than the definition that you might find in a dictionary, and that is deliberate in that I'm trying to provide a definition of confidence that is highly functional for athletes and other performers. And that definition is as follows. Confidence is the state of certainty that about any particular ability that allows you to execute said ability more or less unconsciously. More or less unconsciously. And that unconscious aspect of confidence is extremely important. If you are in the process of consciously, deliberately analyzing every step you're taking, judging every move that you are making, talking to yourself about how you are doing what you are doing while you are doing it, you are always going to compromise yourself a little bit, okay? Your deliberate, conscious, analytical, okay, here's what I'm doing, and I got to get this right, la, 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 la. All that chatter in your head sucks up so much of your nervous system and your body's ability to take in information, to recall from your storehouse of experience the right response, and then to initiate the proper response through your various muscles, through your mouth and your throat and your tongue if you're giving a speech. The deliberate focus on all those details really just inhibits the expression of human performance. So real confidence, the kind that you want to have when the chips are down, is the absence of all that. So my definition, again, breaking it down, that sense of certainty, the feeling of having faith in your ability, knowing that you can do something, and that allows you to get past the conscious thought and perform almost entirely automatically or instinctively. And I would ask all of your listeners, think about the complicated things that you do every day, unconsciously. Something as simple as tying your shoes, which requires dozens of joints and muscles and nerve endings and sensory processes. Think about, I hope some of your listeners have been able to get out to a restaurant in the present COVID environment, and the waiter or the sommelier is bringing the bottle of wine, and he's explaining the specials of the day while simultaneously finding the perfect leverage point at the neck of the wine bottle, inserting the screw, the same perfect number of terms, ease, and the cork pops out, and now your wine is in front of you, and that complicated activity was done unconsciously. How about cultivating that same sense of unconscious competence, that same ability to trust your skills when it comes to taking that final exam, making that job interview, giving that presentation, kicking that penalty kick in the huge game? How about having that same level of automaticity and unconscious execution?
Well, being an Englishman, Nate, I can assure you that we're renowned over here for missing that penalty kick in that crucial game. But being somebody who tends to look at this stuff in granular detail, perhaps I could accuse myself of overthinking this stuff. But there's three areas I'd like to pinpoint there, which I think are really interesting. And correct me if I misheard you here, but I think there was an element of specificity within that definition.
Yes, indeed.
And it smacks really of Albert Bandura and his self-efficacy theory, and this notion that there could potentially be a personal global competence. But when we talk in sports psychology about confidence, we're often talking about specific skills. Would you say, Nate?
Absolutely. One of the most important misconceptions about confidence is that it's some sort of global, all-encompassing quality that once you acquire, you have it everywhere all the time. Quite the contrary is true. And you're dead on it, Dan. Confidence is very situation specific. How you might feel on the soccer pitch versus the history classroom can be night and day different. And even on the soccer pitch, you can have much different levels of confidence depending upon if we're talking about dribbling the ball, passing the ball, playing defense, shooting on goal, making a corner kick, etc., etc., etc. All of those different things have their own component of confidence, their own confidence threshold. So that's the bad news for anyone who's thinking, oh gosh, I guess I can't be confident about myself. No, the good news is that you can become confident in any aspect of your life, any particular skill, any part of your game that you choose to become confident in. It's not much different than exercising your upper body muscles versus your lower body muscles, exercising your pulling muscles versus your pushing muscles. Depending on where you work, you can develop.
The other word I wanted to pinpoint there, at some stage in, I think, post definition, but as you were explaining your definition, you used the word feeling. And I think this is a fascinating thing about confidence. The question around, is it a feeling? Is it a set of thoughts, cognitions, as we'd say in psychology? Is it behavioral? Is it all of the above? look, you've got a wealth of experience across sport, across the military, workplace, and so on and so forth. What's your feeling about this, Nate? Is it just a feel? Is it more? Is it multidimensional?
Here's my feeling about the concept of feeling. My feeling about this is confidence is indeed, I use the term a sense of certainty, and that connotes a degree of sensation, a feeling, but that feeling is the product, is the end result of, is derived from dozens and dozens and hundreds of cognitions. Our cognitions, to such an important degree, drive, constitute our feeling state. So that sense of certainty that we want to have on the soccer pitch, in the classroom, in the swimming pool, wherever, is so thoroughly dependent upon all the thoughts that we have about ourselves, the memories, the stories we tell ourselves, the pictures and short video clips that we produce about our future. All of those thoughts brought together influence our feeling state. So I'm trying to get people to think the right stuff so they get into the right feeling state.
And past, present, and future are three time frames we're going to come on to. One final unpacking of your definition. I told you I think too much about this, Nate. You interestingly said, used the term more or less unconscious. Could you explain that to me? Are you giving people some room for maneuver here around thought processes in combat, in the heat of battle, on the sports pitch?
Absolutely. You got to have a little room to bring in the required level of situational awareness. What is the score of the tennis match I'm in? How well has my opponent been returning serves in the deuce court? There's a time in between every tennis point. A good tennis player is going to do a little analysis. He or she is going to perform, a little bit of tennis-based calculus, and that's great. That calculus leads to a decision. Okay, the best place to put this serve is here. Once that decision is made, then we go to the unconscious process. We don't want to be thinking, okay, in order to produce the serve there, I've got to toss the ball this way. I've got to get my racket in this position. I've got to turn my hips at this point. All of those cognitions are simply going to interfere with the smooth coordination of the serve. So it's the decision about where's my target. That's a conscious, deliberate, somewhat analytical process. Once that target is decided upon, now we turn the execution of the skill over to the unconscious.
So many of our actions that we want to execute under pressure, we want to do so from an automatic perspective. We want those actions automatized. However, because sports, combat, these are fluid exercises or disciplines where situations are changing all the time. What I'm hearing you say here is a little room for higher cognition, to consider the state of play, the state of the field is important.
Yes, you've got to acknowledge your brain's fabulous cognitive capabilities on the conscious level, utilize them when it's appropriate, but also respect your body's remarkable unconscious capabilities and use them when it's appropriate. Again, there's a time to be a workhorse, to think and think and think, and there's a time to be a graceful, elegant racehorse who looks down the track and at the go signal goes. And this is where it all becomes very individualized and very situation specific. That process is going to change for a soccer player, an 800-meter runner, a marathon runner, a salesperson, but there is always an element of the proper mindset for preparation and the proper mindset for performance.
You mentioned there our wonderful brain. and our brain is wonderful, and our cognitions can be wonderful, but quite often our cognitions can attach themselves to things that could be described as out of our control. And control the controllables has become almost cliche within sports psychology, largely cliche because it's true, right? Now, chapter 1 asks the reader to accept what you cannot change. There's things that you can control, there's things you can't control, there's things you can change, things you can't change. How do you tackle this? This is so important. How do you tackle this in the opening chapter? And what relation does this have to confidence?
If confidence is a function of how you think, which is the conclusion I come to at the end of the introduction of the book, then we have to accept a few basic realities about thinking and about the world of human performance. So just coming to grips with the fact that your thoughts do indeed affect your emotions, which do in fact affect your muscle tension, blood flow, hormone production, etc., etc. That acceptance helps you go, oh, okay, I never understood that. Oh, if that's real, then I guess I better be really darn careful about how I think. And that foundational understanding just brings you to a certain peace of mind. Okay, now I kind of know a little bit about the, pardon the expression, battlefield that I'm engaged in. I want to become more confident. I better get really good at thinking in ways that build more energy, more optimism, more enthusiasm for what I'm going to do. That is a foundational pillar upon which a confident mind can be built. Another important pillar, and boy, does this come back time and time again, is the whole idea of inevitable human imperfection. We all want to be perfect so badly, and we sort of fall in love with some perhaps inaccurate representations of perfection by certain sports heroes, certain billionaires, certain individuals that are put up on various pedestals. And the idea is that if we're not perfect, there's something wrong with us. But the ridiculous fact of the matter is that we are all imperfect human beings inhabiting a, let's face it, very imperfect physical body. We are living in a imperfect physical universe surrounded by other imperfect human beings. We've got to get comfortable with the idea of striving to be perfect, but not demanding it of ourselves. Go for it with everything you got. But when you don't achieve it, which is going to be the vast majority of your time, you have to be able to take what you did well, take what progress you've made, and not disappoint yourself, beat yourself up about not being perfect. I heard just this week over here on our national public radio a wonderful representation of this concept, and it has to do with Broadway dramatic productions. I'm sure this is true over in Great Britain. The performing arts industry has been badly battered by COVID.
Yes, absolutely.
And here in the States on Broadway, there have been some Broadway shows where cast members have not been able to perform due to COVID, which means that the understudies, the younger second string players, have to be ready to jump in and take part. This happened over the past few weeks here in New York on Broadway for the Broadway production of a famous American musical called The Music Man, starring Hugh Jackman, the big star actor, Mr. Wolverine himself.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I did not know this, but Hugh Jackman can sing. As well as growl and fight as a superhero.
Yeah.
What happened with this performance is that the female lead, contracted COVID. She could not perform, and her understudy, a lady by the name of Kathy Voitko, she had to step in. She had to be prepared to step in to perform any one of 8 different parts. Quite a demand. And she had all of 4 hours of rehearsal time once she got the notification that she was going to be on. 4 hours of specific rehearsal for that lead, and here she is opposite Hugh Jackman, one of the world's biggest stars. And Hugh Jackman put her at ease, saying, forget about being perfect, have fun on that stage, and just tell the story. And Miss Kathy said, that took so much pressure off me. That enabled me to step in, even though I was sweating buckets, and even though my heartbeat was thudding in my ears, I actually went out there and had fun, and she's gotten great reviews. Forgetting about trying to be perfect, just going out there and being what you can and accepting that you're going to miss a note here and there, that puts you at ease. That's a reality about performance that helps you establish a confident attitude.
It's a wonderful story, and it makes me, I mean, I love what Hugh Jackman did there, and it makes me reflect on 100 years of sports performance and how, as a human race, we've socialized ourselves into extreme language around sports performance. You alluded to various high-profile sports people, billionaires, etc., who might perhaps publicly project this image and use language, extreme language, around perfect and got to, must win, must high perform, must be at my best. It will be a disaster if I'm not. And everything that you're saying there, everything that I hear you say there, really actually rebels against that. Yes, we need to strive for high performance, maybe strive for perfectionism in our training mentality, our practice mentality, but actually when it comes to performing, extreme language can get in our way, and going out there and enjoying it can bring out our best.
Absolutely. Understand that you're not going to achieve perfection, but why not go for it wholeheartedly anyway? But I love your comment about that extreme language. Rather than I've got to get this done, how about the language, hey, let's see how well I can do right here. Maybe you'll be beautiful and maybe you won't. But let's not impose a condition upon ourselves. The very language, I've got to do this perfectly, implies that there is an or else in the background. It's unstated, but the sense is there. I've got to be great. I've got to be perfect, or else something bad is going to happen. Let's take that language out. Let's say, I'm going to be great, and just leave it in that wonderfully open, optimistic level. I'm going to be great. There's no condition, there's no negative consequence to that thought, but there is a heck of an implied negative consequence to the thought, oh, I've got to be great right here, right now.
Respecting what you can and can't talk about with regard to your work at West Point, how does this translate to your work in the military when these young people and older people alike are going off into battle? And I suppose there is an extremity to all of this. Life and death. Sport isn't life or death. Sometimes I think we can be guilty of thinking that way, but on the battlefield, let's face it, it is. How does this translate then, Nate, if you don't mind me asking that question?
It translates directly in that making a distinction between let's see how great we can be as opposed to we've got to be great here. It takes pressure off yourself. It relaxes you. And by virtue of that, it enables you to perform better. You are actually in a better state to execute the various tasks that are important for the completion of a mission when you're in that, let's see how good I can be. We're going to get this right, as opposed to, we've got to get this right. It's bringing that level of tension into the sweet spot as opposed to over tightening oneself physically and emotionally always gives you the best chance to have the right outcome that you want. And it is so difficult, as you indicated, to communicate that and to get people to understand it. But the fact of the matter is, if you talk to the very best SAS commandos, the very best U.S. Army operators, they'll always tell you that you can't be too tight. You can't want it so bad. Otherwise, you're just going to tie yourself up in knots.
It's that trust and let go again, isn't it? But I wrote down there, as you were speaking, curiosity enveloping greatness. That a curious mindset. Let's see how good we can be.
Yeah, that informed curiosity. I know a lot about this. I want to see how great we can be, and I'm going out there with that kind of attitude, as opposed to, okay, these are my mission parameters. This is what I've got to do. There's some severe consequences if we don't complete all our steps. Oh boy, I better be great right now. And just the emotional change that train of thought brings on is just enough to help you misinterpret something, misalign your sights, and those small mistakes can be extremely costly when we're talking about combat. So let's make sure we take the steps to minimize those mistakes.
You've posed the notion that confidence is mediated by how you think, and you've provided the reader with the philosophy that one needs to accept what you cannot change. That's where this starts. And now you're moving on to, I suppose, some tools, some techniques in terms of developing your thought patterns, your thought processes. And chapter 2 is entitled Filtering Your Past for Valuable Deposits. What gets really interesting for me here, Nate, our philosophies and thoughts mirror each other's quite extensively. I talk to clients about 3 tools in their toolbox, or my toolbox and their toolbox as well, and that's memory, imagination, and perception. And it's kind of the next 3 chapters kind of hits those 3. So chapter 2 is almost like memory, filtering your past. Tell me a little bit about filtering your past. Why is that important?
Because we tend to base so many of our judgments about ourselves and so many of our expectations about ourselves based upon our various memories. Unfortunately, there's a strong cultural influence in the industrialized world to place more emphasis on the memories of mistakes, setbacks, and difficulties than on the memories of successes, improvements, etc., etc. So when I talk about filtering your past, I'm asking you to look at your life, look at your experiences in your sport, in your profession, in your performance endeavor, whatever it might be, and let's look at the memories that you have, and you'll find them if you look for them. Let's look at the memories that you have that create a sense of satisfaction and enthusiasm for more. I will ask clients some variation on the question, what's your best memory of playing? What's your best recollection of a fulfilling moment? Tell me about that. And sometimes people have to scratch their heads for a little while, But if I can get you to think back to when you first started participating, What did you enjoy about it? What made it great? It may be hard to put a finger on it, but I'm sure there's a feeling, a pretty cool feeling back there somewhere in your memory. And what's the picture that comes along with that? Ah, whatever that is, I consider that to be sort of the first mental deposit into this mental bank account. And then I ask people all the time, if we were doing this in a video format, I could show you what I refer to as the top 10 list for a whole lot of the athletes that I counsel. Let's talk about, let's identify, let's create a list of your memorable, fulfilling moments. Okay? If you're a golfer, it's the best score you ever had on a particular course. It's the memory of a particular shot that you had. It's the memory of maybe beating so-and-so, with a clutch putt on the 17th green. Maybe it was 5 years ago, but it's a great memory. And when you have it, you get this sense of empowerment. And I want to bring everybody to that sense. So we'll brainstorm this list. We'll print it out in big block letters. We'll attach a cool photo to it. That's just one way of getting you to mine your memories of your long-term past for the moments that create energy and optimism and enthusiasm.
Tell me about you at your best is exactly what I'm asking people quite a lot. And as you've mentioned, we have a propensity to remember failure, don't we? And it's quite funny, Nate, because the amount of times I ask clients to tell me about them at their best, thinking about specific situations. I went on a motivational interviewing course, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, and that was one of the exercises on day one. Could I remember myself at my best? I just couldn't remember. So here I am asking this of people every single day, and here I am unable to remember myself at my best. And it does feel true, doesn't it, that, as I say, as human beings, negatives tend to be like Velcro to us, and positives like Teflon, right?
Unfortunately, that is the way we are encouraged to think. There may be an actual neurological negative bias. As human beings, we grew up in environments. We're talking tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of years ago. Life was kind of uncertain, so we needed to be a little bit cautious and careful, looking over our shoulders, considering worst case scenarios. These days, not so much. And I would also add that, at least according to most of the people who have founded the positive psychology movement, there's just as big a propensity in human beings for optimism. We're wired to be negative. Sure. We're also wired to be optimistic and positive, and to look forward to the thawing out, so we'll be warmer. We look forward to the months where the berries bloom. We look forward to the months when the deer are migrating and we can get a lot of good food. We're wired for that as well. But I think the biggest thing that I find myself contending with, and you've hinted at it as well, Dan, we're socialized to have those memories stick when they're nasty, and we're socialized to discount, disregard, release the memories that are empowering. I'm asking people to be really honest. How well is that working for you, pal? And maybe you want to cultivate a different habit. Let's start with the top 10, and then let's get in the habit of looking at every day's memory. Where did you put in good effort today? What little successes did you achieve? What tiny little indicators of progress have popped up today? Can I get you looking for that? I've got a lot of resistance to this at first, but it's amazing the way that resistance melts once people have tried to do it. Yep. Here's my E, here's my S, here's my P, effort, success, progress. Daily exercise, that builds, just like putting money every day in a savings account.
Well, we spoke on a Sports Social show to Dr. Nicole Gabbana about gratitude, and what you're talking about feels like that gratitude diary. And she trained under Martin Seligman, who's obviously just down the road from you at Penn State. And as you mentioned, I think I've read some stuff from Dr. Seligman around from an evolutionary perspective. We perhaps orient towards threats, but obviously we need a little bit of thought massage in the direction of the other way that we're wired, which is from an optimism perspective. Moving on to the next chapter, constructive thinking in the present. Would love to hear about this. An interesting word, constructive. Constructive. So you haven't said positive thinking in the present. Maybe that's what you mean, but constructive thinking. Tell me about that.
I specifically use that phrase constructive as opposed to positive, and perhaps this is just an Americanism, but I find a lot of times the term positive thinking tends to make individuals sort of default to sunshine, lollipops, rainbows, and everything is nice, hunky dory. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't live in that world of sunshine, lollipops, and unicorns. I live in a world of deadlines. I live in a world of sweat. I live in a world of blisters. I live in a world of muscle fatigue. Come on, let's be realistic about that. So I use the word constructive in terms of what builds you up. What makes it easier for you to execute? What is helpful? So I'm trying to get people, in addition to looking at constructive memories from the past, how about constructively talking to yourself about yourself in the present? You know, as we've touched on before, we all have different opinions about ourselves. We all have different opinions about our game. Going back to that soccer player. Oh, I'm a really good close defender. I tackle ferociously. Okay, there's a story you're telling yourself. But the same player may also say, but I can't hit the goal to save my life. You know, so they're telling themselves a different story about their capability offensively and specifically with shooting. That story that you keep telling yourself has consequences. I'm glad that you consider yourself to be an explosive tackler. Keep thinking that way. That's going to help you when it's time to play some defense. But when you've got a step on your man and you've got an opportunity to drill it, how about having told yourself hundreds of times over the course of the previous months, I am a decisive, accurate shooter. I am a decisive, accurate shooter. That, having done that, allows you to be more automatic when it's time for your foot to make contact with the ball. So constructive thinking in the present is the idea of thinking about what you want, particular skills, particular qualities, particular outcomes, thinking about those things as if you already have them in the present tense, even if you don't at the moment. And boy, does that take some work getting people to accept that notion.
Focused on what you want. I love that because it smacks of positive intent with your actions. It hints at, again using a psychology term, approach behavior rather than inhibit it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, rather than avoidance, as you said there.
Again, I have to give props to my mentor, Bob Rotella, because one of the points in one of his later golfing books is the idea that, is the quality of your thinking consistent with the quality of the performance that you want? I am, in this process, asking people to operationalize that. Make the quality of your thoughts about your soccer game, your foreign language vocabulary, your control of the microscope when you're doing blood analysis. Make the thoughts about your performance consistent with the quality of performance that you want to have. So I cite the example of a track athlete repeatedly telling herself, I run a 156-800. I run a 156-800. I want to run 56-800, even though the best she's ever run at that point in her life was 2:03, I think it was. Are you thinking about what you want as if you have it? Are you building that? Are you empowering yourself that way?
It's really interesting, that last point there. Are you thinking as if you have what you want? Are you embodying who you want to be? Is that as well, isn't it? And as a bit of a neuroscientific geek as well, without doing too much of a deep dive, one of the preeminent neuroscientists is an Englishman called Carl Friston. He's based in London, at University College London. And he talks about, he's very much into the embodied cognition, so the embodiment of thinking. And very much to what you were saying there, he talks about humans not having a model of the world, but being a model of the world.
Wow, what a wonderful way to express it. That's gorgeous.
It's being, doing, and acting who you want to be in that moment, essentially.
I would love to dive into that with any neuroscientist, and the ones that I have had the opportunity to read and study. Richard Davidson over here in the U.S. at the University of Wisconsin, he'll be very much along the same way. What we're talking about is how you think cognitively is literally changing organically the connections in your brain and your spinal cord and throughout your body. So this artificial separation of, okay, cognitions is one thing, but physical reality is entirely different. That's an incorrect understanding. They are changing each other, interacting, feeding on one another back and forth all the time. What control, what positive influence or what constructive influence can you make in that process? And the answer is plenty.
Our brain is our body, and our body is our brain, and our brain and our body are tethered to our environment.
No question about that. So how about doing what you can to influence that process? The somewhat well understood but poorly operated upon concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think a certain way. It propels me to behave in a certain way. The behaviors bring about results. So the results are in fact a consequence of the thoughts I had about it in the first place. Now, Everybody says, yeah, but I think a certain way because of my history. Well, okay, your history has brought you to these thoughts. Understand that from this moment forth, every thought that you have is now causing your future. Yes, they're the results of your thoughts are the results, but now your thoughts are causal, not just a result. They're causing you to have certain kinds of experiences.
I'm going to skip forward a couple of chapters, respecting your time, because I could probably talk to you all day about this stuff. But chapter 5, protecting your confidence every day, no matter what. And it reminds me of a wonderful quote from an incredible human being, the former American soccer player Mia Hamm, who said, the confidence is like a bed. It has to be made every single day. And I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark, and I suspect that this is where you're going with this in terms of protecting your confidences. It has to be worked on every day.
Absolutely. Going back to some of our earlier points about misconceptions, a huge misconception is that once you achieve it, you have it forever. No, not in the imperfect physical universe that we all inhabit. You have to protect your confidence because we are all going to experience setbacks, mistakes, disappointments. We have to mentally be prepared to deal with that. So I offer up some guidelines in how to think about your errors and mistakes and your setbacks, to think about them, first of all, in a very temporary context. Yes, they happened. Yes, they were important, but they only happened that one time. Temporary. Yeah, it happened, but it happened that one time. It was just that one time. Even if something continues, something bad continues to happen, you have to keep it in that temporary perspective, or else you start sliding right down the, oh, here we go again, landslide. That can just crush you. The second guideline is to look at those mistakes as limited in where they occurred. Okay, it happened on this particular hole of the golf course with this particular club trying to hit this particular target, but it's got nothing to do with any of the other targets, clubs, holes that you're going to play throughout the round. You don't have the luxury of generalizing from one or two bad shots that every other type of shot is now in big trouble. It was just that one drive, and the rest of my game is fine, is a heck of a lot more helpful, and it's a perfectly reasonable alternative. And the third protecting factor is to look at those mistakes and those errors as non-representative of who you are and what kind of player or professional you are. And boy, does this get right to the core of ourselves as humans. How do you think about yourself? If you can treat your mistakes as temporary, well, that'll protect you from the here I go again trap. If you can treat your mistakes as limited, that protects you from the, oh, my whole day is going down the tubes track. But if you can treat your mistakes as non-representative, that's going to protect you from the, hey, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm not good enough trap. That huge avalanche of self-criticism that always seems to be waiting around the corner. So it's perfectly acceptable. It's very constructive to put those mistakes in the proper perspective. Temporary, when it occurred, limited, where it occurred, and non-representative from what source it occurred.
Is there a sense that you're asking people, I love that process, is there a sense that you're asking people to flex in their thinking, on the one hand to adopt a rational mindset, and at the same time maybe you invite them to think in a slightly irrational way?
No question about it. There is a time and a place for being very, very rational. And I studied rational emotive therapy, the whole line of work by Albert Ellis and his colleagues. But there's also a time and a place to be somewhat self-delusional. Every great performance breakthrough is the result of somebody who was a little bit delusional in their thinking, you know? And I can't think of a better example than Sir Roger Bannister himself, who was delusional enough to think that he could run a sub 4-minute mile while engaged in his medical school training during a point in history where everybody was pretty much convinced, I don't think this is possible. And he had this, okay, well, maybe it is. I'd give anything to sit down with Sir Roger, but I bet he'd come to I was thinking, hey, let's see if this is possible, in his own kind of way. That kind of curiosity, which is a form of delusion because there's no specific rational data that supports a rational conclusion that such a thing is possible. It's never been done. It probably can't be done. Okay, well, you can think that way if you want. Just understand what it's doing for you and how it's compromising you. But you can perhaps set yourself up with some constructive delusion I cite the example of a car salesman in the United States who entertains a certain delusion that each and every person who walks into the dealer is going to sign on the dotted line that day. Intellectually, he knows that's not going to happen. But he acts from that delusion with that sense of certainty and assurance, and that allows him to be relaxed and convincing in his interaction with customers, and he ends up selling more cars than anybody else simply because he has that mindset, not because he's taller, more handsome, better spoken, better informed about the product line. He just has that assurance, that constructive delusion. Oh, here comes so and so. This person's buying. Let's make it easy for him.
I hope you don't mind me recounting my favorite constructive delusional story. There's many fantastic ones that you've run through there and are in your book, and many examples of how to help people flex their thinking. I do love Dr. Rotella's, you might remember this, Davis Love and Gary Player story, where, and when I say Davis Love, I'm talking about Davis Love III's father, who sadly passed away in a plane crash. But and I can't remember whether it's, in golf, we would play, if you play in America on a US tour, you've got bent grass and you've got Bermuda grass, and one's really quick and one's really slow. And I can't remember which one. So we'll just say Bermuda grass is really quick and bent grass is really slow. And Gary Player and Davis Love used to room together and have these conversations about performance and so blah, blah, blah. And Davis Love said to Bob Rotella, he said, I remember talking to Gary, and Gary came in, and we were on the East Coast, and we were playing with this Bermuda grass, and it was really, really quick. And he said, I love Bermuda grass. I love quick greens. They're my favorite greens. They're incredible. I just putt so well on Bermuda grass. And Davis Love said, oh, okay, Gary, yeah, I know you're a good putter. And then when they were over the other side of the state, right, and he's playing on slow bent grass, and Gary Player's come in after a round and said, Davis, I just love these slow greens. I love bent grass. It's my favourite grass to putt on. I'm just amazing on this. And Davis loves sort of couldn't contain himself anymore and said, Gary, how can you love quick Bermuda grass, slow bent grass? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You can't love both. And Gary Player just fixed him with a stare and said, hey, I'm a performer. You've got to love both. You've just got to love both. And that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? You just got to love going out there, and you've got to love the conditions that you're playing in.
That is a wonderful story. It brings back many memories. It's absolutely spot on. Wherever you are, whether it's a hot day, a cold day, a windy day, a rainy day, whether you're giving your presentation in a cavernous auditorium or a small seminar room, you have to decide to love the moment that you are in. Otherwise, you're tensing yourself up and you're concerning yourself and processing a whole lot of information about adverse conditions. Nope. There's no such thing as adverse conditions. There's just your decision to embrace with them. A good friend of mine said, there's no such thing as bad weather. There's just the wrong kind of clothing for it. She was right.
Now, Nate, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and we have scratched the surface of everything about confidence in your book. 350 pages of golden nuggets related to what confidence is and how you can build confidence and how you can sustain it and how you can get out there on the court, the course, the pitch, the gym, the pool, etc., and go and deliver with confidence. You have a rich history in this area. You have many years of experience. You've worked with some of the finest athletes. You've worked with people who are at the front line under the biggest pressure, the most amount of pressure. You've had some incredible mentors yourself. What would be, you've taught us so much today, but would there be a standout thing for our audience listening in that you would perhaps, putting you on the spot here slightly, what would be the standout piece of advice around confidence? We want our players to build competence, but we also want confidence to mix into that cocktail of confidence and competence. What would be your standout bit of advice?
I'm thinking about a couple of the things that I decided to conclude the book with.
Yeah.
And there's two short stories. One was a remarkable experience that I had when I visited the city of New Orleans back when I was a graduate student. And I had to take a bus from the small house that I was staying with with an associate to get to the conference facility. And the bus driver of the bus that I stepped onto, who I, of course, had never seen before, greeted me as if I was a long-lost, beloved friend. And he looked at me, he said, "Good morning, how you doing? Great to see you." And 3 minutes later at the next bus stop, the same thing. He said the same thing to the next person. "Good morning, how you doing? Great to see you." And at one point, the bus pulled out into a longer roadway and picked up speed, and the bus driver looked in the rearview mirror, and he announced to the entire contents of the bus, "Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day in New Orleans. I hope you're all having a good day. If you're having a bad day, change your mind and have a good day." And that just smacked me right in the face because I'm some graduate student working on a PhD in the psychology of human performance. And here's a bus driver telling me something every bit as valuable as anything I'd ever read in any book or research journal. If you're having a bad day, change your mind. Change your mind. You have that ability to change your mind. And we use the term, change your mind dozens of times. Yes, I changed my mind. I'm going to have the salad instead of the hamburger for lunch. I changed my mind. And we throw that phrase all the time. But do you actually ever really change your mind in the way the bus driver was suggesting? Like, "Oh, I have so much to do. It's all really hard to, let's see how much of this I can get done." Or, "I'm kind of excited to get all that wrapped up and get out of the way." Do you change from, "Oh, we can't seem to score on these guys," to, "Let's keep hammering and dare them to stop us"? It's that change that is so critically important. So if there was a single takeaway I'd want your listeners to have, it would be that one. The ability that you have to change your mind. It requires no talent. It's a simple human capability. And you may be called upon to do that during very difficult moments. The very last story in my book was shared to me by a retired 4-star general from the United States Army, Robert Brooks Brown. When Robert Brown was a colonel during the Iraq War, a suicide bomber detonated his vest in a mess hall very close to where Brown was seated. And tragically, several members of his immediate command, as well as dozens of Iraqi soldiers, were killed. It was the worst day of Colonel Brown at the time. At that time, he was a colonel. It was the worst day of his life. He was 20 feet away from the explosion. And if the bomber had stood up from the table instead of staying seated at the table, Bob Brown probably wouldn't be alive today. But 6 of his soldiers died. But he had to go out with his remaining soldiers the very next day and continue to perform missions. He had to change his mind and stay focused on what was important despite unspeakable tragedy. And I want to reinforce to your listeners that this can be done, that you may have to do it. Faith takes practice, General Brown put to me. Faith doesn't come from some sudden flash of illumination. That's a comforting fiction. The truth is that confidence is a long-haul undertaking, and it's practice, practice, practice. So change your mind and keep changing your mind even if it's during the worst day of your lives. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share that.
Sobering and inspiring stuff, Nate. No, thank you. Thank you for sharing it. Really, really enjoyed that conversation. And I know that so many listeners out there will be interested in getting a hold of your book. And potentially, I don't know, Nate, if you utilize social media at all. But I suppose my first question is, where can people get hold of this book? It's out in January. Where can people get hold of this book? And look, if you do social media, how can people follow you? No problem if not.
I have a Twitter account at Doc Zinsser, and I have a personal website, natezinsser.com. I would be delighted to meet up and connect with any of your listeners through those media. The book will be available through all the online ordering platforms. Over here in the States, we have Amazon, we have Barnes and Nobles, Insight Books. It will be available throughout. The good folks over there in London at Penguin Books are doing everything they can to make it available.
Absolutely. It's been an honor and a privilege, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan, and best to you and best to all your listeners.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.